In the rural outskirts of Massachusetts, nestled between whispering woods and overgrown fields, stood the Greystone house. Tall and brooding, the mansion hadn't welcomed a visitor in decades. Ivy strangled its stone walls, the windows stared blankly out like soulless eyes, and time itself seemed reluctant to pass through its rusting gates. Locals had long stopped walking near it. Children dared one another to approach the fence, but none ever crossed it. There was something unnatural about the stillness of the estate, as if the house was holding its breath. In the fall of 1961, a historian named Martha Denning passed through the nearby town of Ashfield. Curious about a reference in an old diary she had come across, she asked a gas station attendant about the Greystone property. He froze mid-pump and muttered, "Ain't nothing there but dust and bad memories." But the way he avoided her eyes told her there was more. Every town had its ghost story, but this one had structure, details. A house that had been inherited and inherited again, but never sold. A family that had once been pillars of high society had faded into obscurity. And the most chilling detail, a room in the eastern wing of the mansion, sealed for over a century. No one had gone inside. No one ever wanted to. If you're intrigued by stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more chilling mysteries that time tried to erase. The tale begins in 1852 with a boy named William Greystone. 10 years old and full of quiet wonder, William lived under the long shadows cast by wealth and tradition. His father, Charles Greystone, was a towering man of stiff posture and stern silence. His mother, Eleanor, was a delicate woman who spent most days in bed. Her presence in the home felt more through silence than speech. The Greystone estate was not built for children. Cold halls stretched like corridors of stone, and portraits of long-dead relatives loomed with judgmental eyes. Servants moved like ghosts, efficient, silent, and afraid of being seen too long in any room. William had only the company of books and the occasional burst of laughter from his older brother Henry, who was 5 years his senior and loved playing tricks on him. But even Henry had boundaries. "We don't go to the East Wing," he said once, pulling William back as they wandered the halls. "That's Father's rule." "Why?" William asked. Henry shrugged, but his face darkened. "No one ever asks. We just don't." The forbidden wing of the house was more than a hallway. It was a legend. Servants whispered about it when they thought no one could hear. There were stories, contradictory, murky, half-remembered tales about something terrible that had happened generations ago. Some said it was haunted, others said it was cursed, but no one said much at all. That silence screamed louder than words. One stormy afternoon, while rain battered the slate roof and thunder cracked the sky in sharp protests, William slipped away from his tutor. Driven by a mix of boredom and mounting curiosity, he padded through the silent halls, past the library, the music room, and the gallery of ancestors. He paused before the corridor leading to the East Wing. The air here felt colder, heavy with something unseen. The door to the hallway was closed and locked, but William could see faint light peeking from underneath it. "What's in there?" he whispered to himself. As his fingers brushed the brass handle, a hand clamped over his shoulder. He spun around. Charles stood behind him, eyes like slate. "You will never open that door," his father said, voice calm but filled with ice. "Not now, not ever." William froze. He wanted to ask why. He wanted to understand. But the look in his father's eyes wasn't anger. It was fear. That night at dinner, no one spoke of the incident. But the silence was deeper than usual. And from then on, William dreamed of a door he could not open, and a truth that refused to stay buried. The portraits in the Greystone dining hall never smiled. Oil-painted eyes followed every movement, every flicker of candlelight, every breath taken in silence. William often stared back at them, wondering if they had once asked questions too. In particular, the painting of his grandfather, Thomas Greystone, always unsettled him. His face was etched with severity, and his fingers gripped the arms of his chair like a man clinging to power. Henry once joked that if you looked long enough, the eyes moved. William never laughed. The Greystone family legacy weighed heavily over its members. Charles Greystone carried the name like a yoke. He managed finances, land, and politics, with the precision of a blade. He rarely showed emotion and offered affection only in controlled doses. Eleanor, his wife, had grown quieter with the years. Her illness was never named aloud, but her absence at family gatherings was always due to rest. Henry, bold and restless, took after neither parent. He was charming, mischievous, and had a hunger for the forbidden. He was the only one who dared to question their father, and the only one who could make William laugh. Their bond was one of quiet rebellion. While Charles drilled manners and mathematics into William, Henry would sneak into his room with tales of pirates, battles, and distant lands. But even Henry had his limits. One summer evening, as golden light poured through the high windows, Henry and William sat under the giant willow in the back garden. Cicadas hummed, and the scent of lilacs carried on the breeze. "Do you think the house hates us?" William asked, plucking a blade of grass. Henry glanced toward the looming structure behind them. "No. But I think it remembers things it shouldn't." William tilted his head. "Like what?" "Secrets," Henry said. "Things Father won't tell us. Things no one's supposed to know." A few weeks later, William woke to the sound of raised voices echoing from downstairs. His father rarely shouted, but tonight his voice cut through the walls like thunder. William crept down the hall and peeked through the stairwell. Henry stood at the bottom, fists clenched, defiant. "I deserve to know what's in there," he shouted. Charles, standing tall in his dressing gown, replied coldly, "That room is not for you." "Then who is it for?" Henry demanded. "What's so awful that we're not even allowed to ask?" Charles stepped forward, face tight with fury. "You forget your place, boy." Eleanor appeared at the top of the stairs. Her voice trembled. "Charles, please." But it was too late. Henry stormed out through the front door, and the house seemed to exhale. The next morning, Henry was found dead at the edge of the Greystone woods. His horse had returned without him, coat damp with sweat. When they found his body, the only mark was a single bruise at the base of his skull. The doctor said it must have been a fall. But William never believed that. The days that followed passed in a blur. Charles wore black and stood like stone at the funeral. Eleanor wept until her voice was raw, then fell silent. William sat alone, fingers clenching the edge of the pew. No one spoke of the argument. No one asked what Henry had been doing that night, but William remembered what he had heard. "I deserve to know what's in there." As William lay in bed that night, the air in his room felt cold. The house seemed to creak more than usual. Wind scratched at the windows like fingernails. And from somewhere deep within the east wing, where no one was allowed to go, he thought he heard a sound. Not a voice, not quite, but something, a whisper that didn't belong to any living thing. And in that moment, William understood one thing. Whatever had happened to Henry wasn't an accident, and whatever lived behind that door was far from finished. After Henry's funeral, the mansion grew colder, not in temperature but in presence. Servants moved more quietly, eyes lowered, conversations shorter. The hallways echoed longer, as if sound itself hesitated to linger, and the east wing, once only a forbidden curiosity, became a presence in its own right. William could feel it breathing behind the locked door. One afternoon, as he wandered the garden paths alone, he noticed someone watching from the servants' quarters, a girl, perhaps a few years older than him, with sharp eyes and freckles. She looked away quickly, but not before he saw the flicker of curiosity on her face. Her name was Mary Whittle, a new maid hired after Henry's death. Unlike the others, she didn't bow her head when William passed. Instead, she studied him, as though he were the puzzle and not the house. "You're not afraid of me," he said one day, catching her near the kitchen door. Mary raised a brow. "Why would I be?" "Everyone else is," he replied, "or at least they pretend I'm not there." She shrugged. "Fear makes people quiet. Doesn't mean you're invisible." They met in secret after that, exchanging scraps of conversation in shadowed corners. Mary had a sharp tongue and a sharper mind. She told him that servants talked when they thought no one could hear, about the east wing, about the sounds. "What kind of sounds?" William asked. "Knocking," she whispered, "scraping, sometimes crying, late at night." He felt a chill. "Have you ever been near it?" "Once," she said. "The lock's old, but it holds. Still, the air around it's strange, like walking into a cellar that's too still." Mary had grown up in a poor village and didn't fear ghost stories. But she believed in evil, she said, and whatever was behind that door, man, ghost, or memory, was wrong. Their conversations fueled William's obsession. He began walking the halls more at night, waiting for a sound, a sign, anything. The corridor to the east wing always seemed colder, as though sunlight refused to touch it. Sometimes he stood in front of the locked door, listening. Once he pressed his ear to the wood. He swore he heard breathing on the other side. Then one morning Mary was gone. No goodbye, no warning. Just vanished. The head housekeeper claimed her mother had fallen ill, but William knew better. She would have told him. She would have said something. When he asked his father, Charles responded with a look of mild disdain. "Servants come and go," he said. "It is not your concern." But she didn't. "I said it is not your concern." Eleanor, watching from her place near the parlour window, flinched but said nothing. Her fingers trembled against her teacup. That night, William couldn't sleep. His thoughts circled endlessly. Henry's final words, Mary's warnings, the locked door. He crept from his bed and tiptoed through the hall, careful not to wake the staff. The moon cast pale light across the stone floors as he reached the east wing. He placed his hand on the doorknob. It was ice cold, colder than anything in the house. He pressed his ear to the wood again. This time he heard something, a whisper, faint, rasping, almost human. He backed away, heart hammering. As he turned to leave, he saw a shadow move across the far end of the hall. There was no one there, no footsteps, just the echo of silence folding in on itself. Back in his room, he lay awake until dawn. The sun offered no comfort. Nothing did, because the whispers had returned and they were waiting. He didn't know yet what they meant. But deep inside he felt it stir, a truth pressing against the walls of the house, suffocating under years of silence. And the door was listening. The attic was the one place William had never dared to explore alone. It was more than just the dust or the spiders, more than the endless trunks and forgotten furniture. It was the feeling that something watched from the corners, something waiting to be noticed or remembered. But after Mary's disappearance and the return of the whispers, William found himself drawn to that silent, slanted room beneath the rafters. If answers existed, they would be in the places his father never spoke of. And the attic had long since been removed from polite conversation. He waited for the perfect moment. One afternoon, while the staff were preoccupied with a leaking pipe in the kitchen and Charles had taken a rare trip into town, William climbed the stairs alone. The door creaked open on hinges stiff with time. Dust swirled in the narrow beams of sunlight that cut through cracks in the roof. The air smelled of mildew and old paper. The attic stretched far deeper than he remembered. Rows of trunks lined the walls, stacked haphazardly, their contents spilling out. Lace curtains, rusted candlesticks, yellowed books. He moved slowly, lifting lids, peering inside boxes, brushing away cobwebs. Near the back, beneath a faded Union Jack folded over a trunk, he found it. It was a small leather-bound journal. The name inside the cover stopped his breath, Henry Greystone. His hands trembled as he opened it. The pages were warped and faintly stained, but the writing was clear. Henry's voice lived in every word, sharp, curious, burning with the same hunger William now felt. "I've heard it again," one entry read. Voices behind the east wing door, not cries, not screams, something gentler. A whisper, like someone praying or pleading. I thought it was my imagination. I don't anymore. William turned the pages faster, heart pounding. "I asked Father. He told me to forget it. I can't. I feel like there's something wrong with the very foundation of this house. I snuck out last night, touched the doorknob. It burned my skin. Not in pain. In memory." There were pages torn out, smudged lines where the ink bled into water stains. Toward the end, Henry's writing changed, more erratic, as if he had been writing in the dark. "I dreamed of a woman in white. Her face was hollow. She stood at the end of my bed and whispered my name, said I knew, said I would understand when it was too late. William's hands tightened around the book. He felt dizzy, as if the attic itself had leaned forward to listen. He closed the journal and tucked it under his shirt. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of something else. A painting, half covered by a moth-eaten sheet. He pulled the fabric away. The portrait was of a young woman, eyes wide and intense, lips slightly parted as though mid-sentence. Her dress was pale, her skin almost translucent in the oil. She was not anyone William had ever seen in the halls or galleries of Greystone House. There was no nameplate, but her eyes. He knew those eyes. He'd seen them in dreams. That night, Eleanor broke her silence. She appeared in William's doorway without knocking, her face drawn and pale, hands twisting a handkerchief soaked with tears. She sat on the edge of his bed without speaking for a long time. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible. William nodded. She smiled faintly. "So do I." And then she rose, kissed his forehead like she hadn't done since he was a baby, and left the room. Later that night, William woke to the sound of sobbing, not from his parents' chamber, from the east wing. A soft rhythmic weeping, as if someone mourned behind the wall itself, and for the first time William did not feel alone in the house. The morning after the weeping sounds from the east wing, William avoided his father. He lingered by the library, hoping for a glimpse of Eleanor, but she didn't leave her room. The silence had changed. It wasn't merely the absence of speech, it was the presence of something else, something watching. He returned to Henry's journal, reading by the sliver of light that pierced his bedroom curtains. One entry stood out. "She watches from the mirrors. I thought I saw myself, but the expression wasn't mine. She is close, closer than ever." William closed the journal with shaking hands. He didn't know what frightened him more, that Henry had lost his mind or that he hadn't. Later that evening, he sat before the vanity in Eleanor's abandoned dressing room. The mirror had been draped in black cloth since Henry's death. He hesitated, then pulled it down. For a moment there was only his reflection, pale, nervous, eyes wide. But as he leaned closer, he saw something that made his breath freeze. A second figure stood just behind his shoulder. He spun around. No one. He turned back to the mirror. The figure was gone. He waited, staring, heart thudding. Nothing. But something had changed. He felt it in his chest like a rope pulled taut. He fled the room, stumbled through the corridor, and stopped only when he reached the staircase. As he caught his breath, he heard the soft creak of a floorboard behind him. Slowly, he turned. It was Eleanor. She looked exhausted, a robe wrapped tightly around her frail frame. Her eyes were sunken, lips pressed together, as if holding something back. "You saw her," she whispered. William didn't answer. He didn't have to. "I used to see her too when I was young, before your father locked the room." William's voice trembled. "Who is she?" Eleanor looked away. "A memory, a sin, a woman we were never meant to forget." Before he could ask more, Charles appeared at the top of the stairs. His face was a thundercloud. "Back to your room." "Now." William opened his mouth, but Eleanor gently touched his arm. "Go." That night, sleep would not come. He lay with the journal under his pillow, listening to every sound. He dared not approach the east wing, not yet, but he felt its pull. The next morning, a letter arrived from his grandfather's lawyer. Charles read it in the drawing room, face impassive. William watched from the doorway, waiting for some flicker of emotion, but none came. Later, the door to the east wing was found ajar. Servants panicked. One claimed she saw a woman in white crossing the hallway. Another said the piano in the music room had played 3 notes on its own. Whispers rippled through the staff, and 3 quit by sundown. William tried to speak with his father, but Charles refused. "There is nothing to discuss." But William saw it in his eyes. Not anger, not denial, fear. That night, William dreamed. He was in the east wing. The door stood open. A candle burned in the distance. He stepped inside. The walls bled with symbols he didn't recognize. A woman stood at the center, her face hidden by a veil. She turned. Her face was pale, lips cracked, eyes dark as storm clouds. She didn't speak, but William understood. She wasn't angry. She was waiting. When he woke, his pillow was wet with tears. The next morning, Eleanor was found in the parlor, murmuring to the fireplace. She never left, she said softly to no one. She never truly left. William didn't ask who she meant. He already knew. And he realized that whatever haunted the East Wing wasn't just a ghost. It was a consequence. The history of the Greystone family was always told in victories. Land, power, inheritance, each generation etched its mark into ledgers and ledgers of wealth. But no one ever spoke of 1850, the year Thomas Greystone acquired the mansion on the outskirts of Ashfield. The transaction had been quiet, discreet. The seller's name was omitted in family records. The only detail ever preserved was this: the East Wing was already sealed when Thomas arrived, but that was a lie. It began, as most dark legacies do, with a secret. Thomas Greystone was a man obsessed with legacy. Ambition drove him like a fever, but his wife, Beatrice, could not give him an heir. Desperate to secure the bloodline, Thomas turned to strange company. Intellectuals, mystics, mediums. One such figure was a woman named Annalisa. She had come from the coast, brought inland by whispers of her gift. She claimed to commune with spirits, to see the lives buried beneath old floors and stone walls. She was no fraud, too precise, too piercing. And when Thomas first met her, he saw not a charlatan but a tool. He invited her to stay, offering coin and comfort. She agreed under one condition: she would leave after 1 month, no matter the outcome. But as the days passed, Thomas saw something he had not anticipated. People listened to her. Servants spoke to her in hushed tones. Beatrice spent long hours in her company. Even Charles, a boy of 7, seemed calmer in Annalise's presence. And one night in the library, Thomas heard her speak truths no outsider could know. He grew afraid, not of spirits, of exposure. Annalisa had uncovered something hidden, something not even Beatrice knew. Thomas's fortune had not come clean. There had been land stolen, men ruined, names buried. If she spoke, the Greystone name would rot in public disgrace. So he locked the door. He told the staff she had left. He sent Beatrice away to visit family, told her Annalisa had departed during the night. He boarded the windows, sealed the East Wing. No one questioned him. Inside, Annalisa remained. At first she screamed, begged, but the house was large and the walls thick. Over time the cries faded. Then came the knocking. Weeks passed, then months, and then silence. Thomas claimed illness when asked why he rarely left his study. His hair whitened, he grew gaunt. He took to pacing the halls at night, pausing near the East Wing, hand trembling on the door. Beatrice returned months later. She asked no questions. She sensed something broken but never knew what. One night, Thomas awoke to find the parlor mirror shattered. A single word etched in the wood above it: remember. That same year, servants began to leave. Some said they heard footsteps when no one walked. One claimed she'd seen a woman in white standing at the base of the stairs watching. Another refused to step foot near the East Wing, claiming the walls wept. Then the deaths began. A cook fell from the cellar stairs, neck broken. A stable boy drowned in a well that had been sealed for years. A maid miscarried and never spoke again. Beatrice wasted away. Charles grew silent, and Thomas Greystone, once the lion of commerce, became a husk of a man. He died in his study, pen in hand, eyes wide open. The inkwell had spilled across the floor, and the final sentence in his journal remained unfinished. She is not gone. She is... The rest was a jagged line, ink trailing like blood. The journal was never shown to Charles. The staff burned it, but the room remained sealed. Generations later, only whispers endured. But William Greystone unknowingly stood at the edge of that legacy. Not of wealth or pride or honor, but of guilt, a sin buried in the bones of a house, waiting to be known. In 1873, William Greystone returned to the mansion he once called home. Time had altered its face, but not its presence. The ivy clung more aggressively, the shutters sagged, and the path leading to the door was cracked and overgrown. But the house itself still stood with the same quiet defiance, like it knew he would come back eventually. He hadn't planned to return. After his estrangement from Charles, William had built a life elsewhere, teaching literature in Providence, marrying a schoolteacher named Clara, and raising 2 children far from the cold shadows of the Greystone name. He had tried to forget. But the past has a gravity of its own. When the telegram arrived announcing his father's death, it carried no warmth, only obligation. Charles had passed suddenly, no illness, no pain. Found seated in the parlor, eyes open, hands folded, a Scotch glass untouched beside him. Eleanor had died 2 years prior, her decline slow and riddled with silence. The estate was now his. The key arrived in a small iron box, along with a legal letter and a list of assets. William stared at it for days before returning. The interior had barely changed. Dust blanketed the furniture, cobwebs crowned the chandeliers. The portraits remained, stern, unsmiling, watching. Servants were gone. Only an old groundskeeper named Ellis remained, quiet and grey, who greeted William with a simple nod and little else. No one had dared touch the east wing. He stood before the door his entire childhood had feared. The key in his pocket was not for this lock. That door had its own secrets. He spent the first week walking the halls alone. Each creak of the floor reminded him of Henry's laughter, of Mary's sharp eyes, of his mother's fading voice. He entered his childhood room, smaller than he remembered, and found Henry's journal exactly where he'd left it, wrapped in linen and tucked inside a hollowed-out volume of Paradise Lost. He read it again, the woman in white, the dreams, the whispers, all of it. He visited the attic and found the painting still there, untouched. Her eyes followed him. He told Clara little. She stayed with the children in Providence, writing occasionally, her words tinged with concern. He wrote back formally, truth carefully pruned. He did not want to infect them with what the house held. One evening a storm rolled over the hills. Lightning cracked the sky in jagged veins, rain pelting the roof with fury. William wandered to the library and poured himself a drink. His fingers traced the spine of a ledger, an old family account book dating back to Thomas. Curiosity tugged. He searched through ledgers, journals, property records, anything left behind. What he found made his stomach twist. References to a guest in 1850. Discrepancies in food orders, weeks of missing servant payroll, a locked medical report, the dates matched. The same year, Annalisa had come. Her name never appeared. But the omissions spoke louder than facts. Later that night, William stood in the eastern corridor once more. The air was heavier than before, thicker, a pressure in the walls. The door was unchanged, oak iron-banded, the keyhole rusted shut. He pressed his palm against it, cold. No sound, no breath. But he felt her, not behind the door, but throughout the house, in the corners of mirrors, in the rhythm of the wind beneath the floorboards. She was no longer trapped. She had become part of the very marrow of Greystone. When morning came, he didn't open the door. Not yet. Instead, he walked the grounds, letting memory guide his steps. He knew now that the house was his not just by blood, but by burden, and if the truth was to be uncovered, it had to be done slowly, one layer at a time. The mansion had waited for him, and it would keep waiting, because the house remembered everything. The rain returned 2 days later, a steady curtain against the windows. William moved through the mansion like a shadow, touching objects he hadn't seen in decades, as if searching for something he couldn't yet name. But it was in his mother's room, the one she had locked after Henry's death and never reopened, that he found the first crack in the past silence. The door was stiff, the key long gone. He forced it open with a crowbar from the cellar. Dust poured out in a soft cloud, and the scent of lavender still lingered faintly beneath the must. The room was frozen in time. Her dresses still hung, her hairbrush rested on the vanity, and her slippers sat neatly beside the bed. But what caught William's attention was the writing desk. It was a small mahogany piece tucked under the window. He opened its drawers methodically, sifting through old prescriptions, dried ink, and scattered pages of poetry. Then, in the bottom drawer, he found a hidden compartment. Inside were letters, tied in a blue ribbon, yellowed with age, and addressed not to his father or a friend, but to Annalisa. His breath caught. He untied the bundle and began to read. "My dear Annalisa, I am sorry. I am a coward. I should have spoken when they locked you away. I should have fought harder. But I feared him. I feared what he would do to Charles, to Henry, to me." Each letter was a confession. Eleanor had known. She had not agreed, but she had not acted. The guilt was etched into every line. You never raised your voice, you never threatened, you only told the truth. And that, I believe, is why he feared you. The tone shifted over time. The early letters were frantic, filled with desperation and remorse. The later ones quieted into sorrow, then numbness. Some were never sealed, just pages folded over themselves, as though Eleanor had written them for her own soul to hear. One page stood apart, folded many times, the ink slightly smeared by what might have been tears. "Sometimes I still hear you humming. I wonder if you forgive me. I wonder if you remember me at all. Maybe the house does. Maybe it will tell him what I could not." William sat there, the letters spread across the floor, rain tapping at the window beside him. His mother had not been mad. She had been haunted, by silence, by fear, by truth. He gathered the letters and brought them to the library. There by the hearth he read them again, slower this time, trying to piece together the woman his mother had once tried to help, and failed. A name returned to him. Mary. He remembered the day she vanished, the way his father had brushed it aside, the way Eleanor had watched but said nothing. It wasn't just Henry who had drawn too close to the room. Others had felt it. Others had seen. William lit a candle and walked the east corridor once more. The door remained shut, unchanged, but this time he didn't touch it. Instead, he spoke. "I know about the letters," he whispered. "I know about her." Silence. Then, faintly, just for a second, the smell of lavender. He turned, but the hall was empty. The house wasn't threatening him. It was inviting him, not with anger, with memory. Later that evening, as he placed the letters inside a drawer in his study, he realized something Eleanor had once written was still echoing in his mind. The house remembers what we choose to forget. And now, William was ready to remember. He just didn't know yet what remembering would cost. It happened on a Thursday. The day had begun as many others, grey, quiet, wind brushing the tall grass that had overtaken the gardens. William had slept poorly, haunted by a dream he couldn't quite hold on to after waking. A humming, a door opening slowly, a woman stepping into the light, then darkness. That morning he walked the eastern corridor with purpose. No fear now, only resolve. He brought tools, a chisel, a hammer, oil for the rusted hinges. He didn't ask permission, not from memory, not from ghost, not from the blood that still clung to the stone of the Greystone name. The lock protested, groaning like a dying animal as metal surrendered to time. When the final bolt fell, a breath escaped from the door, as if something within had waited too long to be heard. The door creaked open. The room beyond was not grand. It was small, narrow, its only window bricked up from the outside. The walls were stained with damp and marked by symbols scratched into the wood, strange shapes, some resembling stars, others like twisted letters from no known alphabet. A single iron bed sat against the far wall, its frame rusted, the mattress decayed and rotting. The scent was thick, earth, mold, and something older, almost sweet. William stepped inside, candle trembling in his hand. On the wall above the bed were carvings, lines etched over years, layered and crossing, names, phrases, symbols. But one stood clear in the center. They must remember me. Beside the bed he saw it. Chains, attached to the bed frame, corroded but unmistakable. And still clinging to the far corner, bones. A skeleton curled inward, the skull tilted toward the door, shackles still on the wrists. His stomach lurched. He knelt, unable to move, unable to look away. The chains were not rusted through. They had been locked until the end. Annalisa hadn't vanished. She had been left here. Forgotten. No, not forgotten. Silenced. He reached out and touched the bed frame. The iron was cold but not lifeless. And then the air shifted. The candle flickered violently. The symbols on the walls seemed to shimmer. And William saw her. Not with his eyes, but with something deeper. She stood before him, young, pale, translucent. Her dress was torn, her hair long and tangled. She didn't move. She didn't speak. But her gaze bore through him. In that moment, William understood. She wasn't a spirit begging for revenge. She was the memory itself, embodied, the wound the house carried, the truth no Greystone ever allowed to live beyond whispers. He dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "We were wrong. My family. We did this." The vision of her began to flicker. She stepped back. Her face softened, not with peace but with recognition. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was making sure she was seen. As he rose, the symbols on the wall began to pulse with heat. The candle extinguished. But William didn't need light to find his way out. The door closed behind him. He didn't lock it. That evening he sat in the library, hands blackened with soot and dust, letters spread before him, journal in his lap. For the first time, the house felt quiet, not empty, settled. And yet a part of him knew this was not the end. Truth doesn't vanish because it's unearthed. It lingers. It breathes. Later that night, thunder rolled over the hills once more. And William, staring into the dark, whispered a name he'd never been taught but had always known. Annalisa. The following weeks unfolded in silence. William no longer needed to explore. The house had opened itself, and the truth had stepped forward. Yet what followed was not peace. It was erosion. It began with dreams. He saw the room as it had once been, new, unblemished. Annalisa sat by the window, writing in a small notebook. Her face was calm, resigned. But when she looked up at him, her eyes held a depth of sorrow he couldn't bear. Then the room would shift, walls twisting, bed melting into stone, her voice echoing in 1,000 fractured words. "You carry it now." William awoke each time soaked in sweat, gasping. He began to forget small things, dates, times, even the faces of his children in framed photographs. Clara's letters piled unread on his desk. He feared what he might write in reply. Some mornings, he found himself in different parts of the house without remembering how he'd arrived. Once he stood in the music room holding a rusted candelabra, blood on his knuckles. The next day he woke with scratches down his arms. The house was no longer passive, it moved with him. Servants, hired briefly to restore parts of the estate, left within days. One claimed he heard someone whispering his name from inside the walls. Another found a child's handprint in the dust of the locked east room, though no children had been present. The worst came when William stood before a mirror in the main hall and did not recognize his own reflection. The man in the glass looked like him, yes, but his expression was wrong. The eyes were colder, the mouth set not in sorrow, but in judgment. He blinked. The reflection did not. He smashed the mirror that day and locked the library behind him. He started talking aloud, at first to Annalisa, then to the house itself. "Was it enough?" he asked once. "Does truth erase what came before?" The wind groaned through the chimney in reply. He found Henry's voice on the pages again, and in the echo of his own footsteps. He remembered Mary's warnings, his mother's trembling hands, the sharp silence of Charles Greystone. Each memory returned not as comfort, but as weight. The house had held their sins, now it was feeding them back. Clara sent a final letter. She had taken the children to Europe. She could no longer wait in silence. She begged him to sell the estate, to leave before it consumed what was left of him. He folded the letter, placed it on the mantel, and watched it burn. He no longer wanted to escape. Not because he was bound, but because he finally understood the shape of the curse. It was not a ghost or a revenge or a haunting. It was memory, unburied. It was guilt, unspoken. It was what happens when silence becomes a foundation. He wandered the halls now, speaking freely. "Henry," he'd say, pausing by the window, "you knew, didn't you? Before the rest of us." Or, "Mary, I should have warned you, I'm sorry." To Annalisa, he said nothing more. He simply listened, And one night she returned, not as a vision, not in a mirror, but in the smell of lavender on the stairs, the hush that fell when he passed, the flicker of candlelight without flame. She was there, and she was not angry. She was presence. William sat alone in the parlor that night and wrote a single sentence on a fresh page: "I will carry what they would not." Then he placed the journal in the hearth, unburned, and waited for the dawn. In the autumn of 1912, a woman arrived at the Ashfield train station carrying 2 leather suitcases and a box of carefully organized documents. Dr. Rebecca Winslow, age 32, was neither a stranger to death nor to the stories it left behind. A parapsychologist trained in both London and Boston, she had built a modest reputation studying haunted estates, sites of collective trauma, and memory phenomena. But the Greystone house was unlike any other place she had encountered. The letter that summoned her had been unsigned. Delivered through a private courier, it contained only a single sentence: "There is a room that remembers everything." She had heard of the Greystones. Everyone in her field had. Whispers of the mansion's reputation extended well beyond Massachusetts. Unexplainable deaths, disappearances, a history of silence and secrecy stretching over half a century. But no formal study had ever been conducted. Every inquiry met a closed gate, until now. She found the estate as described, looming, overgrown, heavy with a kind of stillness that seemed to resist sound. A caretaker greeted her at the edge of the drive. His name was Ellis, and though aged, he remembered everything. "Mr. Greystone passed 5 years ago," he said simply, opening the gate. "And the house?" she asked. Ellis didn't answer. He only nodded toward the structure ahead. Inside, little had changed. Furniture draped in linen, dust layered like memory. Rebecca wandered carefully, her shoes muffled against the creaking wood. The library was intact, the parlor undisturbed. And then she found the door. The east wing, it was not locked. Her hand hovered over the knob, not from fear, but reverence. She opened it. The hallway beyond was narrow, the walls marked faintly with scratches, as if time had tried to claw its way out. At the end, a single room. She stepped inside. Everything had been left as it was. The bed, the chains, the carvings in the wall, preserved. Nothing altered. And in that silence she felt it. Memory, not hers, not even the house's, something in between. She began her work that day. Notes, sketches, measurements. She recorded temperature changes, humidity, the flickering of light. At night she wrote in a separate journal, one not meant for publication. "There's a presence here that does not want to frighten. It wants to be acknowledged. I believe it is female. And I believe she is waiting for someone to understand her pain, not her power." Over the next week she studied every inch of the east wing, then expanded her search to the rest of the mansion. She found Eleanor's letters tucked within a hollow book. She found Henry's journal, still preserved in a linen wrap. She found William's final entry in the study, written in a bold, slanting hand: "I will carry what they would not." And she found a name etched faintly into the inside of the library hearth: Annalisa. Rebecca spoke it aloud once. The fire behind her flickered. She was not afraid. She set up her phonograph equipment in the parlor, running wax cylinders to capture ambient sound. Twice the cylinders recorded whispers too faint for the ear. Once a melody, 6 soft notes like a lullaby. She wrote, "This house does not scream, it mourns. Every room weeps differently. The east wing sobs. The music room sighs. The mirrors hold their breath." By the second week, the dreams began. She walked hallways she'd never entered. She saw a woman in a white dress always at the edge of her vision. And once she awoke with the scent of lavender thick on her skin. She did not question it. The Greystone house had become her patient, and like any patient, it would reveal its trauma slowly, painfully, through the language of silence. Rebecca Winslow believed in patterns, not omens, not curses, but consistencies in behavior, even from things not fully understood. And at Greystone House the patterns were beginning to emerge. She started with controlled experiments. Each night at the same hour she would sit in the East Wing room alone, recorder ticking beside her, and speak into the silence. "Annalisa," she would say, "I'm here to listen. I don't want to take anything from you." The first few nights yielded nothing. Only the creak of settling beams and the flutter of moth wings in the lantern light. But on the fourth night, the air shifted. The candle at her side flickered violently, though there was no draught. She asked again, "Are you with me?" Then a faint sound. Not a voice. Not movement. Breathing. The cylinder recorded it. Later analysis showed a sustained exhale lasting nearly 30 seconds, followed by a single word spoken so softly it could barely be made out. "Stay." From that night forward, she never entered the room without asking permission. Rebecca documented changes. Temperature dips near the bed frame, shifts in pressure along the north wall. Once she awoke in her guest room with the sensation of hands gently pressing against her shoulders, neither menacing nor affectionate, anchoring. She developed a theory. Annalise's presence was not bound by rage or revenge. It was bound by a desire not to be forgotten. The house had carried her memory because no one else had, and now Rebecca had opened that door wider than ever before. But the more she listened, the more personal the phenomena became. She began to dream vividly, long, lucid dreams of corridors that pulsed like veins, of mirrors that reflected not faces but feelings. She dreamed of her childhood home, abandoned long ago, and of her mother whom she hadn't seen in years. She dreamed of a girl sobbing into a cracked wall, whispering names through the stone. Annalisa had become more than a subject. She was awakening something inside Rebecca, too. She began having memory slips, forgetting where she placed items, hearing her own voice in rooms she hadn't entered. Once she found a note written in her handwriting. "She listens when we remember." Rebecca hadn't written it, or maybe she had and couldn't recall. She contacted her colleague in Boston, Dr. E. Harold Ennis, and shared her notes. "What you're describing," he said, "is imprint resonance, trauma that doesn't just linger, it replicates. Be cautious. You're not just observing it. You're participating in it." But she couldn't stop. She returned each night to the room. She began speaking about her own regrets, her estranged sister, the silence after her mother's breakdown, the guilt of absence. And something shifted again. The house began answering her not with sounds but sensations. The fireplace in the parlor lit without match. A melody from the piano she'd never learned to play came to her in a dream, and the lavender scent returned, no longer soft and fading but full present surrounding. One morning she opened her journal and found a new line written beneath her last entry. "You are not alone." She dropped the book. Her hands trembled. She was no longer a visitor. She was part of the memory now. Rebecca sat in the east room that evening and closed her eyes. "Tell me," she said aloud, "what they refused to say. Show me what they would not face." The room grew cold. The floor beneath her feet shivered. And behind her eyelids, she saw the mansion as it had been, a vibrant laughing place once before the silence, and a woman standing in chains, whispering the names of those who still had time to remember. By 1960, the Greystone name had all but vanished from public memory. What had once stood for influence and inheritance had dissolved into whispers and dust. The estate, still intact but barely maintained, was now home to only one: Michael Greystone, great-grandson of Charles, and the last of the line. Michael had never intended to stay. He had been raised far from the mansion, educated abroad, and taught from a young age to avoid the family's past. His father, quiet and distant, had died in a car accident when Michael was 15. His mother followed soon after, consumed by an illness no doctor could name. He inherited the estate at 28, but never moved in. Until now. A business downturn, mounting debts, a failing marriage. Michael returned to Greystone House not out of duty, but necessity. He brought with him his 6-year-old daughter, Anna, a curious child with eyes too old for her age. They moved into the west wing, keeping to the rooms most functional. The rest of the mansion remained sealed, but the house, as always, remembered its inhabitants. It started with dreams. Michael would wake with the sound of footsteps just beyond his door. Anna began speaking of the quiet lady who visited her at night and asked strange questions. "Does she say anything else?" Michael asked, trying not to show concern. "She says I'm safe now," Anna replied. "She says she remembers me." Michael laughed it off at first, but when he saw muddy footprints outside Anna's door one morning, his laughter died. He began researching the house's history. What little was recorded came in fragments, notes, half-burned letters, ledger discrepancies. The name Annalisa appeared only once, in a list of unpaid wages from 1851. No role assigned, no departure date. Then, in a creaking drawer in the study, he found it. A journal, leather-bound, its pages brittle, the name on the inside, William Greystone. Michael read through the nights, every detail, every confession. He didn't want to believe. But Anna spoke again of the lady, how she whispered songs no one had taught her and smelled like purple flowers. Lavender. One morning, he found Anna sitting in the east corridor, just outside the sealed room. "Did you open this?" he asked, panic rising. She shook her head. "It opened for me." The door stood ajar. Michael didn't go inside. Not yet. He sent Anna to stay with her aunt in Boston. She went without protest. Before leaving, she said one last thing. She said thank you. Alone in the house, Michael wandered the halls in silence. He spoke aloud at times, as if someone listened. And someone did. He would hear a piano note in the stillness, the brush of fabric along the stair rail, the creak of the library chair when he wasn't sitting in it. The house was alive with remembrance. He decided to sell. He contacted an agency in Springfield, arranged for inspection, prepared documents. But on the morning of the appraiser's arrival, something changed. He found the journal moved to the east wing threshold. Its final page, previously blank, now held a new sentence, written in his own handwriting. "If we forget her, we forget ourselves." The appraiser never arrived. A landslide on the road. No one was injured, just delayed. Michael stayed one more night. He walked the house room by room, saying names aloud: Eleanor, Henry, William, Annalisa. And in the mirror of the main hall, for a single instant, he did not see his reflection. He saw hers, not sorrowful, not vengeful, just present, watching, waiting, still remembering. Michael returned to the east wing just before dawn. He carried no tools, no light, only the journal now marked with a new page each time he touched it. He didn't try to understand it anymore. The logic of the house moved beyond cause and effect. The door stood half open. It hadn't been locked in years, and yet it had never truly opened either. Not like this. Inside, the air was warmer than expected. The candle William once left on the bedside table had melted entirely, fused to the wood. The chains still hung, but the skeleton was gone. Not removed. Gone. As if time itself had relented. The carvings remained, lines and scratches layered over generations. But now, at the center of the far wall, another phrase had appeared. Clean. Recent. She spoke, and the house exhaled. Michael didn't know what it meant. Not exactly, but he felt it. The mansion no longer pressed inward. It opened as if releasing a held breath that had spanned more than a century. He sat on the edge of the bed frame, journal in hand. He whispered her name once more. Annalisa. There was no reply. But then, from the hallway behind him, came a soft breeze. Not from a window, from nowhere, and with it the scent of lavender, fresh and full like summer gardens long buried. He stood and followed the wind, through the corridor, down the stairs, past the library and into the parlor, every step guided not by direction, but memory. He reached the fireplace. The ashes from decades of forgotten fires lay undisturbed. But when he touched the mantel, the stone shifted. A hidden compartment opened. Inside, a locket, tarnished silver, its chain broken. He opened it slowly. Inside was a miniature painting, delicate, worn by time. A woman, pale and proud, eyes that stared back with clarity undiminished. Annalisa. The locket had been buried with her. He was sure of it, yet here it was. He pressed the locket to his palm, and the room changed. Not physically, not visibly, but the temperature dropped, the air thickened. And then she appeared. Not a ghost, not a trick of light, not even a vision. Annalisa stood in the reflection of the parlor window, neither inside nor outside, not young, not old. Her eyes met his through the glass, calm and clear. Michael stepped closer. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She nodded once, the faintest gesture, then her lips parted, not in warning, in forgiveness, and in that moment, the mansion exhaled again. It wasn't a release, it was a surrender. Michael took the locket to the east wing. He placed it on the windowsill where the brick once sealed the only glimpse of sky. The scent of lavender faded. The wind stopped. And the house was still. He did not close the door. Instead, he retrieved a brass plaque from his bag, one he had made before returning. He fastened it to the doorframe with quiet care. Here slept Annalisa, not lost, not forgotten, remembered. He walked out without looking back, not because he feared her presence, but because it was no longer necessary to watch for her. She had been seen. He locked the front gate one final time, journal under his arm, and began the long walk down the path where vines no longer reached toward him, and the wind whispered not in warning, but in peace. Years passed. The Greystone house remained, silent and unmoving atop the hill, its stone facade darkened by decades of wind and weather. No one lived there. No one dared demolish it. Yet it stood not abandoned but waiting. In 1982, a local preservationist named Elaine Mercer published an article in the Massachusetts Historical Review titled "The House That Remembered, a Legacy of Silence at Greystone." It began simply, "Some structures are built with brick and wood, others are built with memory." The article sparked quiet curiosity among historians. Elaine, who had spent 5 years researching the estate and its lineage, gathered fragments. Personal diaries, death records, missing persons reports, and oral testimonies from the oldest residents of Ashfield. The piece centered around a room, a single sealed space in the east wing of the mansion, and a name, Annalisa. Though the records were incomplete and no census ever listed her, patterns emerged. Mentions in servant logs, rumors passed from housekeeper to housekeeper, a woman once hired, never released, a name carved into walls, whispered in dreams. Elaine never claimed supernatural truth, only historical silence, but that silence had weight. The article ended with a photograph, taken by Elaine herself during a rare permitted visit to the estate. It showed the door to the east wing, and above it, the brass plaque Michael Greystone had left. Here slept Annalisa, not lost, not forgotten, remembered. In the years that followed, the Greystone house was designated a site of cultural memory, not for its architecture, but for what it had held. Students studied it. Writers borrowed from its legend. Psychologists quoted it in studies of inherited trauma. But the house never opened its doors again. And it didn't need to, because Annalisa had been remembered. And that was all she ever asked. Some say the house still breathes, that if you walk past it at dusk, you'll catch a whiff of lavender on the breeze. That if you look up to the east wing window, you might see a pale figure standing there. Not trapped, not bound, just present. Others dismiss it as folklore. But those who've read the journals, those who've held the letters Eleanor wrote and listened to the recordings Rebecca Winslow archived, they know better. They know memory lingers. They know silence has a sound. And they know that truth once seen is never truly lost again. If this story captivated you, subscribe to our channel for more forgotten tales and historical mysteries. Every week, we uncover another corner of the past, where shadows still speak and memory still lives. And don't stop here. Click the video on your screen now to explore another dark secret buried in history.